Does. Good. Why does love matter? Recap and consolidation. In the short term, infants need immediate care from others to survive, and they encourage this with their physical appearance and behaviours. Figure 6.2. You can't build a hut you don't know how to find edible roots, and you know nothing about predicting the weather. In other words, you do terribly on our IQ test. Researchers need to be aware of how sensitive their measurements are to context and history. In the long term, parenting is a big investment, and over the course of our history, this has caused infants to advertise their worth and parents to be selective over whom they cared for. A peak in the early brain plasticity creates an especially sensitive period early on in development. Early experiences matter, but they matter to some children more than others. Some responses to early experiences are adaptive for later life. Emotions help us set out our goals and regulate our well-being. Infants start out with a basic repertoire of positive and negative emotions that become more differentiated over time. Children develop a similar vocabulary of emotions. Precisely what those emotions mean is shaped by social interactions and cultural norms. Attachment in a cross-cultural context. In Chapter 2, we took a brief look at attachment, a special emotional bond that children develop with one or more caregivers, where the attachment figures give children a sense of security and stability. Let's take a deeper look at attachment and see how well it holds up. When we look at children growing up around the world in diverse cultural contexts, universality attachment is universal. There are two aspects of attachment that appear to be common to all children from studies that have looked at patterns of childcare across societies. First, children the world over appear to have a preferential bond with one or more caregivers. In many cultures, children grow up with a network of attachment figures, but the parent or caregiver who takes responsibility for the care of the child during part of the day or night becomes their favorite source of attachment. For example, across non-Anglo-Saxon and European societies, children seek closeness to the attachment figure when they are placed in a stressful situation or feel tense or anxious. Van Zendun and Sagi Schwartz, 2008. Underlining what is at stake here, researchers found that all 28 of the countries they looked at, the death of the mother, who is typically the primary caregiver, is in most cultures, was associated with a much higher child mortality rate. Sear and Mace, 2008. Second, different types of attachment. Avoidant, secure, insecure, and resistant have been reliably identified in forager societies with higher levels of cooperative parenting by people other than the parent mothers, and the affluent and deprived urban contexts across Africa, East Asia, and Latin America. Mesman et al., 2016b. The most straightforward explanation as to why attachment is universal is the infants are born universally helpless, and caregivers are universally predisposed to help. Who children attach to and how they express this attachment are more culturally variable. For example, infants from the Hosea community, a native ethnic group from West and Central Africa, we generally physically restricted in their location by their caregivers and are thus less free to explore the environment by themselves. Marvin et al., 1977. These infants explore their immediate environment in a more visual way and by manipulating objects, but they only do so when in close proximity in an attachment figure, and they cease to explore in the way as soon as caregivers leave. The Hosea infants clearly use adult caregivers as a secure basis from which to explore, and they differentiate between attachment figures and strangers, but the way they express attachment is shaped by the local context. Marvin et al., 1977. Key points. Children the world over appear to have a preferential bond with one or more caregivers. Different types of attachment have been reliably classified across very different societies, albeit expressed in culturally specific ways. Normativity, secure attachment, is the norm. Studies across a range of diverse societies suggest that more children fall into the securely attached category than other categories of involvement, insecure and resistant. The category of securely attached itself emerged from Mary Ainsworth's extensive research in Uganda, and since that early work it has been evidenced in a wide range of cultural contexts. While securely attached often ranks the most frequent type of attachment, the obsolete level depends on local circumstances. For instance, levels of security attached infants were particularly low in rural, economically poor Mexican samples, GarDjinn et al., 2012, and in undernourished Chilean population, Venezuela, 1997. Not having the economic resources to reliably provide basic care for children in terms of nutrition, healthcare, safe housing, and clothing is likely to be universally stressful for parents, emphasizing the importance of socio-economic circumstances in shaping family life and parenting patterns. Van Zendoorn and Sagi Schwartz, 2008. Across diverse societies, most children fall into the security attached category than other categories, but the obsolete numbers are affected by a variety of socio-economic and cultural factors. Sensitivity. Sensitive caregiving encourages attachment security. A sensitive caring style involves judging when a response is needed and what a good enough response looks like, as well as adapting the response to the psychological needs of the child in that moment, all of which require the carer to engage with the kind of theory of mind, Tom, reasoning and mindness we met in chapter 3. There is a cross-cultural evidence that secure attachment is related to caregiving sensitivity. In a sample of 1,150 Asian families living in the USA, 87% of whom were born in Asia, observations of maternal sensitivity were significantly related to observations of infant attachment security. Huang et al. 2012. Mesman and colleagues 2016a reported a strong association between maternal beliefs about the ideal mother and attachment theory description of sensitive mother across 26 cultural groups from 15 countries. While the rates of sensitive behavior by parents are very similar across cultures, what sensitivity and responsiveness looks like varies. For example, in some cultures, appropriate responding to infant vocalization may consist of touching or stroking the infant, whereas in other cultures it may involve imitating the sound that the infant made or smiling at the infant, e.g. Kartner et al. 2010. Soothing through nursing and feeding is much more common in non-Western than Western cultures. True et al. 2001. In societies such as that of Bolivia, infants are typically in sustained physical contact with caregivers throughout most of the day and night, often being carried on the caregiver's back. Consequently, they encounter less direct face-to-face engagement with infants growing up in societies that value vocal and visual interaction, such as that of the USA. These differences in experience change what infants expect sensitive parenting to look like. When US parents stopped engaging with their infants and maintained a still face for a brief period of time, their infants got upset. By contrast, the Bolivian infants were unaffected by a still face, but they became upset when the equivalent task introduced physical unresponsiveness. Broish et al. 2022. In cultures where parents are more continuous, close physical contact with infants, caregiving tends to rely more on distant ways of checking in and sharing attention, such as a mutual eye gaze. Overall levels of mutual gaze can further moderate by social hierarchy. For instance, when there are norms that stipulate low-ranking individuals should not gaze at individuals considered to be higher ranking. Bard and Keller 2024. Key points. Sensitive caregiving is associated with attachment security across a range of societies, but that sensitivity expressed is culturally variable. Yeah, it's because there's lots of dangerous animals, and if you're like making noises, you're going to attract the predator. So if you like give them a stroke or a smile or anything like that, it's less dangerous than going, oh, there, baby,